Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Majority Show. My name is Mark Devlin, and welcome to Scotland's #1 anti-nationalist show, broadcast every Wednesday, 7 p.m, live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm here tonight with my co-hosts, David Griffiths and Mary Devlin. A great show coming up. What we'll be talking about tonight?
Well, tonight I'll be looking at what was uncovered last night on the Ferry scandal.
And I tonight will begin an examination of the SNP's big lies.
And I'll be asking who wants to live in a high-tax Scotland. And of course, we will also have Zoomer of the Week. So we'll see you back in a few seconds. Okay, welcome back to the Majority Show, Scotland's #1 anti-nationalist show. As always, a huge shout out to our donors, people who donated to the show to make it possible for the setup and for the running costs. If you would like to join them, we have, you can go to our donate page here, which is, and you can put, we're happy for any type of donation, small, big, everything doesn't matter, everything can keep the show going. Is great. Or you can buy a t-shirt or a mug in the Majority shop. Okay, so this is where I'm supposed to show this beautiful design sturgeon mug that you can get from our store. And you can see Mary there showing off our incredible Majority t-shirt. Anyway, you can get all of that stuff at the Majority website. Just go there at the top menu, you will see, look at that, you can see some buttons at the top there, donate, and so and shop, and so on. All that is great. In fact, you can see, look, you see yourselves, delay slightly there. Right, so, okay.
Well, we'd also like to thank our friends at UK Union Voice and the United Against Separation for supporting the podcast. They let us broadcast directly to their Facebook pages, where many of you are now watching.
And please remember, subscribe on YouTube for alerts for the Majority, because as we've said before, once we get to 1,000 subscribers, we will get a lot more exposure on YouTube's algorithm. So as we've said, we're over 500, well above 500 subscribers now, so please hit that button.
Yeah, in fact, we're over 500, as David says, and when we go over 500, we get a new feature, which is a community feature on YouTube. So it does help to subscribe. New things that unlock for us, part of growing the channel, and if you can do that, please help.
And as you know, I'll be handling all the comments tonight as well as co-hosting on the show. So thank you for your comments, and please try to keep them short so that I can get as many of them up on the screen as possible.
Right. Sorry, Dave,
Oh yeah, I was going to say, wherever you are, guys, please like, share, comment, tell friends, extend our reach at the click of a button.
Okay, right. Coming up, I'll be looking forward to comments on High Tax Scotland. David is going to be talking about lies nationalists tell, which is could go on forever, one supposes, and Mary's going to be talking about the Ferry scandal. All of that in just a second. Right. Well, we've got a very specific Majority news this week. I want to tell you that our petition against to stop NewsQuest and Gannett, its US owners, publishing the Nationalist anti-English hate, is now up to 6,670 people. If you haven't signed the petition already, please go to our website or just go to change.org and type in NewsQuest. It will come up there. There's much more on this topic to come over the next few weeks, so we'll keep you informed about how things are going on. But every signature does make a difference. That's part of how you can do help us and help our community. But tonight we are going to start with Mary and the Ferry fiasco.
Thank you, Mark. Well, last night BBC One Scotland's disclosure programme focused on the Ferry scandal. So for those of you who haven't seen it, I'll give you backstory. A week before the independence referendum in 2014, Jim McCall, big pal of Alex Salmond and the SNP, bought Ferguson Marine Shipyard when it fell into administration. A year later, Ferguson Marine was awarded a £100 million contract to build 2 very large ferries. But Ferguson Marine were not up to building these ferries, and it's been a disaster ever since. The shipyard went into administration again, and so the Scottish Government nationalised it, at great cost, of course. The 2 ferries are currently £150 million over budget, which is about 150% over, 5 years late and still not finished. So, I mean, that's what we did know before watching the documentary. Did you guys, David, Mark, did you see the documentary last night? Have you seen anything like this before?
I watched it. 2 things I want to see. Firstly, have you noticed today that there's been yet another delay announced for the projected launch of one of the vessels, which will now be Q1 2024, and there are more delays anticipated for the second vessel. So talk about picking a good day to put out bad news. Anyway, that's what they've done. But yeah, I watched it, found it very heartening to see for once a BBC Scotland journalist daring to speak out and ask probing questions of a senior SNP figure or decision. Because usually, as we know, Andrew Neil will pinpoint them. Peter Smith from STV is very good, as is Kieran Jenkins from Channel 4. They're good at drilling SNP guys. But for a BBC Scotland journalist, that's quite unusual. So to me, it made clear that the gravity of this whole affair, which is now going to become known as the SNP's rigged ferries procurement scandal, which is exactly what it is, as the show showed very clearly last night. So yeah, long may this new sense of responsible journalism continue.
Well, I think it was a good show, and I think that it did show that the bidding process was rigged.
No question.
So CMAL definitely broke its own rules throughout the whole process. Ferguson was allowed to go ahead with its bid without the mandatory financial safeguards, which it should have been a builder's refund guarantee, and they just weren't in a position to do that. Ferguson was given a 424-page document in order to make their bid, but all the other bidders were only given a 25-page spec. Ferguson was allowed to change its design to a different kind of boat in the middle of the bidding process and reduce the price as well. Now, so none of the other bidders got these advantages, and of course this is all highly illegal.
Yeah, I think we've got a clip from the show of this one.
Well, the word that was most often used was irregularities. But I think that was putting it kindly. Do you have that, Mark?
Yes, I have that in just a second. Hold on. Let's do this.
We're all holding on.
Yes, we're all holding on.
Every single bidder had met the criteria with regard to bank guarantees, surety bonds.
Edward Mountain was the convener of a parliamentary inquiry into the ferries contract.
My understanding is it was a mandatory requirement for all the people putting forward their names for the tender to have a bank guarantee. It's clear from the evidence that you've shown me that Ferguson's never had the ability to do that. What slightly concerns me is what Kevin Hobbs told the committee was that only became visible after the tender had been accepted. What you've shown me is it was clear that it was never in place and it was unlikely to be so.
Is what Kevin Hobbs told you the truth, according to what you've seen today?
Not a version of the truth that I would have given to a committee of the Scottish Parliament, no.
Okay, so that was just one of the issues. Now, CMAL, who were overseeing the process, their government department, they say that they chose Ferguson Marine bid even though it was more expensive because the design was the best. But the documentary showed that it wasn't. The evidence, I would say, clearly showed that the tendering process was rigged for Ferguson Marine to get the £100 million bid. And as I've said before, this is all very highly illegal. But I guess what the documentary didn't really cover, or they didn't go into it, explicitly, They didn't say who ordered CMAL to rig the bid. So I'm not sure, was it CMAL themselves? Did they come up with this great idea to rig the bid? Was it Derek Mackay, who's been blamed by Nicola Sturgeon already, that he says he's not taking the ball? Was it Alex Salmond, who was great pals with Jim McCall? Was it Nicola Sturgeon, because, you know, she wanted great PR for SNP, the Scottish Government? And we didn't really find out, you know, why was it rigged. Some might say, you know, was it a reward to Jim McCall? He was the one that gave the yard, who bought the yard and gave the SNP the greatest PR just a week before the referendum.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty much obvious that it's for propaganda purposes, right?
Yeah.
The whole idea that an independent Scotland can make big deals with and save jobs and make ships. Everyone was happy with these ships being built on the Clyde, of course. Scotland likes to see that. But the problem was they didn't have of course then they rigged that to happen to get headlines, which is so common in this administration, and then didn't actually realise that they actually had to make ferries, you know, at the end. And so this is all falling apart. And I mean, talking about propaganda issues, we have Nicola Sturgeon, which I'll remember the ferry launch. I have that just coming up here, where she launched the ferry, even though it was just with the page on Windows and so on.
Yeah.
So we'll have a look at that right now.
Well, this is a really significant day and a really special occasion. Ship launches are always emotional occasions, but to have the return of commercial
It seems to be sticking a bit, Mark, I think.
Oh, is it?
building here on the Clyde at Ferguson's is extra special, and this vessel will serve local island communities in Scotland. It's also good for the environment. It's a low carbon vessel, the first dual fuel vessel anywhere in the UK, and together with its sister ship also being constructed here will help secure employment at this really important shipyard.
Well, that was quite a long time ago, wasn't it? You can say, you know, quite some time ago, and the ferries are still sitting there in the dock.
So, but a lot of people might ask, you know, why does this matter? You know, why are we still going on about this, you know, ferry scandal? And I think, you know, the tendering process is a highly legally regulated process, and for good reason. The reason that they do this so strictly is because they want to make sure that the best bid is chosen, so that the people who they give the bid to can actually design, build, and deliver the ships, and at the best cost. And I think this has shown up very clearly that what can go wrong if you rig bids.
Well, there have been calls for police patrol into the row. I think there was some. John Swinney was saying today that it wasn't required, or that they were, you know, it was a bit like marking their own homework. But sure, it's up to the police to decide whether they are going to have a look at this or not. I mean, obviously, when you're looking at something like this, millions of pounds are involved, and it's, you know, it really stinks of corruption right from the top. And you know, the thing was that there were yards that could have built this and could have been had proper jobs and saved all the time, building their expertise. They lost this work, and it's just not really right at all.
Absolutely. And I think what this, if you like, suggests is that if the police Scotland don't look into this, why on earth wouldn't they? And it will bring to the fore suggestions which do exist, that the police in Scotland are actually working on behalf of the SNP government rather than working on behalf of what they should be doing, which is ensuring that laws are upheld and are not broken. And so it's not up to John Swinney to say whether or not the police should look into this, anything but somebody in the SNP has to be accountable, because right now, who is accountable? Nobody. Everyone's just blaming each other, pointing like this. It's farcical.
Well, I mean, certainly if this scandal had happened in the UK government, people would be calling for Nicola Sturgeon's head, in fact, calling for the entire government's head.
Absolutely.
There's this, even when you look at the discretions of past Scottish government leaders, it's so tiny in comparison with this level of scandal. I mean, and this is just one of the scandals. We have, still get Gupta to come up. When is BBC going to do a documentary on that? Perhaps the doors can open now and start, the media can start actually, especially we talked about this last week, the TV media especially can start, getting in and saying, well, there's something really wrong here, something at the rotten in the heart of Scotland, to use Shakespeare, I suppose.
Well, I think also that people have to think about it. At the moment, this is costing at least an extra £150 million, and that's money that could be put into other should be put into other things like the NHS or given to the councils. What could they do with £150 million, or even used for this cost of living crisis that we have? But the worst thing about this is, one of the worst things about this is that the people and the businesses on the islands, these people rely on the ferries for their everyday life, and they're still waiting and they're still suffering. Last night we saw that children can't get to school, businesses aren't getting their supplies, people can't get to hospitals. Yeah. People are losing their livelihoods, they're losing their businesses.
Indeed, and you're right, Ferry.
This is the cost of illegal bid rigging, and this is why it matters.
Quite right, and not only that, we know that the one defence the SNP keep mounting is, we save jobs on the Upper Clyde or the Lower Clyde. Sure, but at what cost? Because these guys aren't producing anything. This is just like the darkest days of nationalised industries, which is exactly what Ferguson's is now, which are unproductive and sustaining, or incurring rather, unsustainable losses. And that's what we're back to what the business was like in the 1970s, when we produced nothing of any worth. And it's just laughable. You cannot just say, we've saved jobs. Jobs doing what, though? Jobs failing to build ferries. Absolutely ludicrous. So somebody's got to carry the can here. I can't see how they're going to be able to blame everybody but themselves much longer. Somebody's going to have to be the fall guy here, I'm sure, really.
Well, we just got a great comment here. This is Gordon Candlish. He says, so you are happy with the budget, you lot are stupid. And I think the level of that comment, I don't think that works too well for you there, Gordon, I'm sorry.
Indeed. As John said today, I would like to complain about the standard of question being raised, as he said very loftily and pompously. Time's up your game, Gordon.
It's fine to waste, our money. Yeah, that's the idea behind it. The waste is fine as long as it's our money. I don't think so. That's not the way we should do it. Waste is waste. And waste that money, as Mary said, we spent in other places. Well, if Helen of Troy had a face that launched 1,000 ships, Sturgeon has a face that couldn't even launch 2. So, in a bit, David will be talking about nationalist lies.
Absolutely.
But do you know that the very best way to stay up to date with the podcast, not a podcast anymore, it's a show, is to go onto our YouTube channel and subscribe. That is the best way, because then you get not only get alerts, but you can chat. And then people watching this actually on Twitter can't do any chatting on Twitter on this if your comments don't come through. But if you're watching Twitter instead, go to YouTube, and that's fine. Right, coming up. How much tax do you really want to pay? The question we will try and answer in just a second. Righty-ho. Okay, so where are we here? Right, so Liz Truss, can I say that? Liz Truss and Ozzy Cartett released their mini budget, as they always do. It's always everywhere. Which aims to stimulate growth by cutting taxes. Whether you think this is right or wrong approach, and not many people disagree or agree, and many Labour people don't like it, or also many Tories don't like it. Nonetheless, it presents a major challenge for taxpayers in Scotland, with higher rate earners paying 6% more than the same people in the rest of the UK. But it's not just really about those higher rate earners. The elites, even as some people like to paint them as, from April, if anyone in Scotland earning over £14,732 will be paying more income tax than those in the rest of the UK. When we're talking about people earning 50,000, which is maybe a decent salary, they're getting hit for almost 2,000 more a year. And that's not to mention stamp duty, which has been not really in the news. You want to buy a house in Scotland, the minimum, the threshold is so much lower in Scotland, which means if you bought a £425,000 house, you wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't pay any stamp duty in England, but in Scotland you'd be paying £15,000 because the threshold starts at 175,000, which is not really.
That's quite a lot of money. I mean, £15,000 is a fair whack.
Exactly, and I noticed some SNP people said, "Oh no, the thing is though, with stamp duty cuts, all it does is inflate the cost of the house prices, and that added to outrageous interest rates. Outrageous interest rates is 1.75 or 2.25%. You know, so ludicrous. But I don't know if you noticed it, guys, but there's so many SNP sheep appearing on social media saying what great value the additional tax was in Scotland. So they obviously got instructions to say all this, but they all produced a list, and the list had the same items on it, baby boxes. So I'd love to know how a single guy in Scotland earning 50k feels about paying over 150 quid a month more in income tax than someone in the same salary in England because baby boxes. Yeah, that sounds like a good deal, mate. Yeah, great. And then of course the most eye-watering sum of this whole debate is in Scotland now, if you earn between £43,663 and £50,000, you pay 41% income tax. In England, a worker in this bracket pays 19% income tax. Scots workers earning between 43.6k and 50k pay more than double the income tax paid by English workers in the same salary. I mean, really, how do you justify that? But the other stuff.
So the difference is between 19% and
41%.
Wow. So well, that's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, indeed. So, and of course, the other benefits that were trotted out were quite cheekily free tuition fees. Yeah, we do have free tuition fees or taxpayer-funded tuition fees for Scottish students, but Labour introduced it, guys, so you can't really claim much credit for that. And the other one, of course, is free sanitary products, which was a bill presented by Monica Lennon of Scottish Labour, and the SNP initially voted against it. And now they're trumpeting it as a great initiative of their own. What a cheek, honestly. So yeah, totally fake, utterly worthless offence of these now unsustainable Scottish tax rates, I would say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's I think there's some disconnect here. The middle class Scots are delighted that their kids get free education, which is paid for by working class English and Welsh taxpayers.
Quite.
It's really quite shocking, I think. But let's, we want to talk about ordinary people to some extent. But I mean, what happens if the wealthy do leave? I mean, does anyone? I mean, I'm asking you out there. Do any of you think that the wealthy won't leave? I mean, Scotland is a country where people have always left for better opportunities, and some of those opportunities are about how much money you're going to end up in your pocket, right? I remember when I was a student and I was looking at the jobs available in Scotland, and it was, of course, the opportunities were much greater than London. You can make more money, but now you can add on to that you get if you were successful. And young people do want to be successful. Then you think, well, even if I'm successful, it's going to be taken away from me. And well, I mean, that's an argument. On the other side of that, there is the argument: what about your services? Are services really better for the money you pay, and are they being distributed well? I think we can agree that that's not really the case here. So let's just look at the numbers here. We know that 1% of high tax payers contribute 21% to tax incomes in Scotland. So of that 1%, which is actually 18,000 people, each person that leaves actually makes a big dent in the amount of taxes, right? Because Scotland is underrepresented in the amount of high taxpayers it has. One would think it would be 1 in 10. In fact, it's more like 1 in 3. Half that, or a third of that. Sorry, a third of that. So what's going to happen then is that these high taxpayers are going to either leave or they're going to arrange their fares so that they don't pay as much tax. And that's what we actually saw recently, where Scottish, even though Scottish tax rates were high, they weren't actually bringing in any more money. So, what do you think of that there, David?
It's true. We all remember Derek Mackay being embarrassed in Holyrood when he was asked about the potential impact of the Laffer curve on Scottish economy, and he didn't know what it was. He'd never heard of it, and that is, of course, the fact that if you raise taxes, it can lead to lower revenues. So the SNP is financially, economically illiterate completely. They have no idea what they're doing with taxes, none at all. So yeah, it's just going to be more and more. I agree with you. I know people, I know high earners who are saying to me, I'm going to have to go somewhere in England, and what's Cheshire like? I mean, where I used to live, asking me, in all seriousness, and they're not bluffing. They would move like a shot. We saw running a lot of people like that yesterday. They're already talking about it. Of course it will happen. Why on earth would you stay somewhere where you're earning less and being taxed more? Why would you do that? I mean, I'm a classic example. My family, we were moved down to England when I was a teenager at secondary school, and I felt very outraged about this and wanted to come back. I came back to Scotland, got my degree, got a job, and within 18 months I was back in London, because what else are you going to do? You're not going to stay somewhere where salaries are lower, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that we're in a union. It's the fact that there are large cities, mostly the capital cities or the most populous cities, where the largest salaries are paid, and it's the same in every country, and it's got no... It's not as if Edinburgh is going to be in an independent Scotland, the place where everyone earns £1 million a year. Not a chance. London is always going to be that place on the island of Great Britain. Always, always, always. So all this stuff is just hogwash. It's just ridiculous.
Well, the financial people, we live in Japan for a long time, as you know, and we worked in the finance companies where people are very focused on how much they earn, how much they tax, right, and how much they can avoid taxation, and how much they can legally avoid it, of course. Right, so this is a thing that high earners do.
Yep.
It's hard enough to make the money. You want to keep it, right? So people will naturally, high earners will naturally put the money offshore, and it's not as if there's not any precedents for this. It's a kind of Scottish exceptionalism, actually, to say that Scotland is so great that really wealthy people will either not come here or will stay here. But even the SNP's Jim McCall, right?
Yep.
Lives in Monaco, and there's a bunch of other people who are famous wealthy Scots, you could name them, and most of them live overseas, an exception being perhaps J.K. Rowling, and the reason she's an exception, she's not Scottish, but living in Scotland, paying Scottish tax, is that we hear about that because it's unusual that she actually does that, right? So I want you to go on to go ahead.
Well, sorry. I was just going to say that I think people forget that when you're wealthy, it's not that difficult to move. I mean, your moving costs are pretty low, so people could find another house. But a lot of people might have more than one house already. So Jim McCall, I'm sure he's resident in Monaco, but I'm sure he's got a house in Scotland. So it's all to do with where you're resident is where you pay taxes. So you can still have a place in Scotland, but be paying your taxes somewhere else.
That's right.
Yeah, we're only allowed in so many days of the year. But talking coming in, the other part of this whole thing is that it stops inward investment. Okay, we have.
Sorry, Mark, you just brought up an interesting point there. How does that work then? So, if you're paying, say you're paying English taxes, are you only allowed a certain amount of days in Scotland?
Well, I don't know how. I don't think that's the case.
Well, there you go.
Is it? I mean, so can you have?
So all you need to do is have an address in England, I assume.
Well, maybe not if Scotland ever becomes independent, but currently, yes, I think that's true. You can do it. Depends where you're registered, as they say. Yeah, you have to have a place of where your main residence is, and I think that dictates.
Well, would you want the Scottish tax police will be coming down on you because you live 2 miles across the border?
Quite. Yep.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Actually, we should probably investigate that a little bit.
Yeah, how is that regulated, the different tax rates? I don't know. And there's an interesting comment, if I can just find it again, it came in from Catherine, and she was saying it's not just people who are working, but people who are retired that are thinking of leaving as well.
Sure, that's true.
Yeah.
So a lot of
Well, does that mean, okay, as you say, people are leaving, but the bigger problem, I think, is actually that people are not coming. Because if you're you're a multinational company, you want to set up your new factory in Scotland, and the executives get around the board room and they say, well, actually, we have to pay more tax here. And it's not even that's the length of the conversation. We're going to have to pay more tax in Scotland, and then everyone looks around the table, laughs a wee bit, and then they put the factory in Northumbria, right? I mean, that's what happens. Or they put it in Cornwall, they put it somewhere else. Why on earth would any executive was wanting to put a factory down in Scotland subject themselves to more tax voluntarily? It's utter nonsense.
Well, the thing that companies hate just as much is not knowing what their tax rate is going to be in years ahead. So if they think that the Scottish government can vary it a lot from the government, the UK government, then they're not going to like that. Companies like certainty.
Yeah.
Quite.
No,
the business markets demand certainty, that's right.
Well, there's a part of me that says, having different tax rates in different places allows a competition in tax rates. That works kind of in the States. You see a lot of people living from California, say, to Texas, which is low taxes, or Florida, for example, where we lived before, has very lax taxes. But that works when you've got lots of different states and lots of competition and people who live around. It doesn't work when it's just there's an easy border, like that. So it doesn't make much sense. Anyway, so whether you agree with the having higher or lower taxes or not, the problem is this tax disparity is a problem. And it's a problem for Scotland going forward. And we believe, I believe, and I think people actually probably believe as well, that tax rates should be harmonised across the UK, and they should never have been given the ability to punish Scots for just living in Scotland, because that's really what it amounts to, I think, at this stage. And hopefully, as we go forward, we can maybe claw back some of those type of powers. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later in the week. Coming up, I'm going to get a new set of batteries for my mouse because it's a little bit of difficult situation. So I'll be off for a second. But David is going to lead up with talking about the SNP's lies.
Okay, everybody. So tonight, what I wanted to do was to examine some of the big lies at the heart of the SNP's independence drive. Now, these are falsehoods which are routinely stated by even the most senior SNP figures, and which are then immediately and obediently parroted as gospel truth by gullible supporters of independence. So tonight, I'm going to discuss two of these lies, and I will examine more of them in the weeks to come. So the first is a relatively new one, but nonetheless, we see it pretty much every day on social media. And that is when supporters of independence claim, I'm not a nationalist, I just support independence. Right, okay. So, and this is used by people mainly who are aware that nationalism as a term or as an entity is hugely unfashionable, and rightly so. Now, this claim is, of course, complete nonsense, because if you're in Scotland and you vote for a political party which calls itself the Scottish National Party, and whose sole policy is to break up the United Kingdom due to some sense of historical grievance and resentment of wealthy English people, then you're a nationalist. No ifs, no buts. You might not like being called a nationalist, but you're a nationalist. It's as simple as that. Plus, saying, I'm not a nationalist, I just back Scottish independence, is like saying, I hate alcohol, I just love getting drunk, which is meaningless. I mean, you can't have one without the other. If you're a nationalist, you want Scottish independence. If you want Scottish independence, you're a nationalist. That's it. Now, of course, you'll see this line used often by independence supporters in conjunction with its twin phrase nowadays, which is to label opponents of Scottish independence British nationalists. Now, there is no such thing, of course, as a British nationalist. You can get English nationalists like the BNP, whatever else, but there is no British nationalism. It's a complete falsehood. It's a fake term. And this comes from a tactic used by the American political theorist and activist Saul Alinsky. He had rules for radicals. This is what he used to talk about. And one of his rules was accuse your opponent of what you are doing. And that's exactly what they're doing now. So Scottish nationalists deny that they're nationalists, and they label those of us who are not nationalists as nationalists. That's what they do. Have you noticed this, Mark? I think you've talked about this before, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got an article that's been written for months about it and getting all
Yep.
the different points about British nationalism. There are many, many points about why this is false. But I wanted to say, actually, I'm quite a fan of Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and the reason is, people often mistake this idea that activism, if something's used by, say, your opponent against you,
Yep.
that is not necessarily a bad thing, right? The tactics are applicable to all kinds of activism, and it's good to know which rules that you're up against, so that you can fight them and fight back as well. Use them if you want. Why not? But why should they have all the fun? So I say. Anyway, my main issue with the term British nationalism, or one of the issues I have with it, is that apart from its inaccuracy, it's a form of othering. They call us British nationalists because they can't accept in their minds that we're actually Scottish anti-nationalists. We're not Scottish to them. They label us as being British. Now, it's okay to be British or Scottish, but it's a deliberate thing to say.
Yeah.
To other us, and it's of course, othering is a primary trait of nationalism. You're not part of the Scottish group. Because you're not a Scottish person who doesn't believe in their idea of Scotland, then you must be a British person, and not even that. You must be the worst kind of British person, a British nationalist. Now, there is no British nationalism around them, as much as they would like to say that. So what they've got is an imaginary British nationalism, which they're railing against, while they go out and vote and support for a very real Scottish nationalism. So
Quite right.
It's just one of these things that you can throw it back to them. You say, all right, if you don't like British nationalism, you don't like nationalism so much, then why are you Scottish nationalists? Then they go on to say, oh, well, our nationalism is much better than every other nationalism. We've got progressive nationalism and stuff like this. So you kind of have a progressive movement based on othering, for a start, and which you've just done, and then based on greed and division. How can you do that? You just can't have that. That's not the way it works.
Quite.
And so it's just a load of nonsense, this British nationalist thing. It makes them feel morally superior because it puts their idea of, they know Scottish nationalism is bad, everybody knows bad, but they think British nationalism, this imaginary British nationalism, is worse, so they can feel better about themselves.
Pathetic. I agree. Quite right. So yeah. So that's one of the first big lies. So watch out for it, guys. You will see this. The second, which I'd like to talk about tonight, is much older, and it is Scotland subsidises the rest of the UK, or the other way they put it is Scotland puts more into the UK coffers than it gets back. Now this has come from, or it dates back to the 1970s, from the first days of North Sea oil, and some of you will remember the ludicrous "It's Scotland's Oil" campaign at the time. Now, nationalists to this day claim that oil revenues from the North Sea, which they say is belonging exclusively to Scotland, when they go to the UK Exchequer, the benefits which Scotland gets back is way outweighed by the amount that they put in. So now the truth, of course, is this claim is complete fiction, total lies. Any halfway serious economic study will confirm that in financial terms and many other terms, Scotland benefits enormously from being in the UK. So the most recent GERS figures, which is the Government and Revenue Scotland figures, commissioned by the Scottish Government, let me just say, they show that the public expenditure per person in Scotland is £1,963 per person higher than in the UK. And in addition, Scotland's tax revenues, which is how much Scotland gets back in as a public body, if you like, was £221 lower per person in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. In other words, the Scottish Government's own figures show that by being in the UK, every Scottish person gets a financial benefit of £2,184. So someone will have to explain to me how that equates to Scotland putting in more than it gets out. Completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing goes back to what I said a minute ago. It's like nationalism is greed, right?
Yep.
Basically, the whole idea, it's your oil. No, it's not your oil. It was UK's oil. It was UK's oil from the beginning. Just because you want to draw on a new border and claim all the good stuff for yourself That doesn't make it yours. That's not right. And even when I was young, I said this before on the show. When I was young and that campaign was going on, I was like, but that's just greed. And this whole idea that they want all the good stuff for themselves, and a lot of it's driven by that. So much is driven by this idea. They kind of and then to justify that, they make all these Scottish exceptionalist arguments. They say, of course, Scotland finances the rest of the UK. But how can 5 million people or 6 million, I don't know the population, fund a population that's 10 times? Now, you might have said, all right, if there was massive oil revenues coming in year after year after year after year, then some people might have been attracted by that greed argument. Okay, I think that's what happens in Catalonia, right? I mean, it's the wealthiest part of Spain. And so they say, we're wealthy, get away from the rest of those poor folk, don't stop paying them. But imagine London did that.
Yeah.
Right? London went away, and then we'd be like, London's independent. What would Scottish nationalists be saying then? They'd be saying, no, greedy bunch of greedy bastards, right? That's what they'd be saying.
It's true.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, it's absolutely ridiculous. And I like to think of the psychology of all this, right? The psychology of this is based on this idea that we're not getting what we're due, when in fact we're getting much more than we're due. And I talked last week about politicians in people's ears saying you're not getting what you're supposed to get. You're not getting what you're supposed to get. It's like it's morally repugnant, actually.
Agreed. And of course, let's not forget that Scotland, as we know, as the GERS figures show, runs an annual deficit, which effectively lays bare the gap between the amount spent in Scotland in public services and the revenue from taxation in Scotland. Last year, that deficit was £35.8 billion, now mainly down to decreased productivity because of lockdown and COVID. This year, it's a bit lower, but it's still 23.7 billion. Now, that deficit effectively doesn't really impact on Scotland right now. Why? Because the UK foots the bill. The problem with the rise of Scotland was independent, and they had a deficit like this, and it would be this and much, much more. So then Scotland would have to go into the international market as a newly independent country with an untested currency, no central bank, and borrow money. I mean, seriously, that's how you go bankrupt. That's how Scotland ends up like Zimbabwe or Venezuela. So it's very, very important that we recognise and understand that these figures and these claims from the SNP are complete lies. Totally, totally false. No foundation.
Yeah,
no
but I mean,
basis
sometimes even if it's true, they're like, well, so what? It's worth it. There was a tweet the other
Yeah,
day,
quite.
some guy said that, right? And you're
Yes.
like, well, I don't want to be, a king of your ashes. That's the thing. You can burn the place down if you like, but most people will move with their feet. In that case, they really would move, because what would happen to their Scottish pound? Just look at the financial markets. These people are, take advantage of any type of weakness. That's their job. They spend their whole time thinking, how can we look at these governments and see how weak they are? And you see this is happening in the markets right now with the UK government. And look how strong the UK financial situation is. One of the top countries in the world. And then you say, okay, Scotland's going to be independent, as it were. And, people just go like, look what they did with the ferries. You can't even run a ferry contract. Right?
Right.
So that's going to be, just thrown to the wolves. These people have no idea what's going on. We're talking about Kate Forbes, who was the finance minister, had 2 years of accountancy training, right? Compared with people like Kwasi Kwarteng and Rishi Sunak and these people before. They've massive work for these hedge funds. They know what's going on, and even they can't even handle it.
Absolutely. You're right. And I mean, as you say, Mark, I mean, people have no idea what would happen. And they say, oh, don't care, it'll be worth it if we had independence. Would it be worth, how many hospitals would it be worth closing? How many schools would it be worth shutting down for independence? Because that's exactly what would happen. If you can't meet your bill to pay public services, you switch off street lights, you shut down old people's homes. That's what happens. So all this nonsense about, it'd be worth it. How dare they say this? So let's just keep it based in reality. So my message to everybody listening and watching is, when you hear this stuff, refute it, because it's complete lies. Scotland doesn't balance its budget at all. It doesn't come anywhere close because we can't attract enough inward investment, as Mark said earlier, and we certainly can't meet the massive public sector bill we have, primarily the amount of benefits we pay, the free stuff. That's what's crippling Scotland, among many other things. So just remember that next time you hear this
Well, I think as
completely.
well, we have to say to people a little bit, is like, what is it you're looking for? You're looking for a socialist paradise, right? Or a libertarian paradise, like the idiot Scottish libertarian. They're looking for some kind of utopia that comes from independence. Well, who's going to pay for it, right? When everyone's moved away, you know, all the high earners have moved away, and you can't get any money. The only people then who'll pay for it are Russia and China, and people that are not really, you don't really want to be in hot to. So it's just, that's, I mean, there's a whole financial level there, I think, is one thing. But I like to go back to the thing, it's just based on reading a lot of cases. And you say to people, I say to a guy on Twitter the other day, say, why are you such a goody bastard? And it's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you got to take all the money, that's, you know, you use it for yourself. That's not socialist.
And not pay any of your share of the debt, exactly.
No,
So it's
so, you know, why is it reading?
quite.
Like, well, I don't think they've ever really been asked that before, and I think this is going to come up a bit more with this new Labour focus against the SNP, where they're going to start saying more and more, well, nationalism isn't progressive, it is greedy, it is toxic, it's all these things, and they're painting themselves as a real socialist, which one would hope they are. Coming up, if you can, please donate to Podcast or Tell a Friend, or both, or everything else. Says here. All right, and then we're going to have. Oh, that's it. I see it now. The things you can do to support the show. You can donate. You can buy a T-shirt or a mug. You can subscribe to the show. Please do that. And you can tell friends about us, or you can do it all of those. Coming up, it's the highlight of the week. Moment you've all been waiting for. It is Zoomer of the week.
Yay!
Oh, it's me. Okay. All right. So my Zoomer of the week is Adam Tomkins. Not for anything he's come up with this week, but because he was architect of giving more tax powers to the SNP, a topic that we've all been talking about this evening. So I'm just going to try and get this up here. All right. Okay. So it started way back. Mr. Tomkins was a proponent of giving more powers to nationalists. Why, as a Tory, he would do such a thing, I don't really know. Anyway, here we've got here back in 2014. He's saying here that he's planning to offer Scotland full control of income tax as part of the devolution sweetener if Scots choose to reject independence. He said that Scots don't want independence. What they want is enhanced devolution. Well, perhaps if he talks to Tories, you might have realised that wasn't the case. Well, then he went on with his ideas until the independence referendum came along, and he offered the vow. Remember that, which was unnecessary in my opinion. But anyway, here's now the vow. Adam Tomkins changes will bring end to SNP pointing the finger.
How did that work out?
I mean, come on, mate. Don't you understand the basics here? The idea might have been, I don't think the idea was, there's a theory that was to set a trap, like what's happening right now, right? That they would increase the taxes so much, and then the UK would put the taxes down, and then with this disparity, the SNP would be struggling to deal with it. Okay, but there's some merit to that. But in the meantime, people are actually suffering. They don't. You know, they're going to have to pay much more taxes because of this idiot's idea. He didn't need to give extra taxation, right? Taxation powers to the Scottish Parliament. He said, this new Scotland bill is important because it means that SNP can no longer pretend that governing requires no more than finger pointing and childish blame game politics. What do you think they're doing right now, even though the tax rates are different? Blaming Westminster.
Absolutely. And they're happy.
I'm almost ready to throw my papers away. Except the nickel.
We still have the end of the show to go.
Come on! It's like, why all appeasement or constant appeasement? It's like, does SNP want more tax powers? No! That's the answer. No! You're not getting more power.
I don't really understand how they can be so naive. You know, I did not see that this is exactly what they do and where it's going to go. I mean, this is what nationalists always do.
Well, it's not even that.
There is actually a playbook.
Well,
You know,
it's a
people could
playbook.
refer
They've seen it now. They're still abusing them, right? They've seen what years of it now, and they're still see. You know, this should be printed. This article, this value one, should be printed, and it's put in an ad van in front of his house, and say, this is the type of mess that you got. And supposedly conservatives, we need to say no to this, and not. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it better to give them a referendum. It doesn't make it better to give them more powers. It doesn't make it better at all. The only thing that stops them is hope. It's stopping their hope. Yeah. That's it. You need to stop all hope for them. No referendum, and that's what Labour's doing actually. I think quite good. Well, Labour are saying, not even getting a referendum, no way.
Exactly.
And they're like scrambling, like, why isn't Labour giving us a referendum? We're supposed to be part of a progressive alliance. Oh, how are we going to get a referendum now? Labour's like, progressive. We don't like it.
A couple of comments coming in here. We've got Catherine, who says, Tomkins is basically a good guy, but believed that the SNP could be contained by promises. Yeah. So that didn't work out. And we have, Elizabeth Miller, she says, maybe people will have to suffer before the penny drops and they vote the SNP out.
Well, they don't, because the lower tax people are not taxed, right? And the lower tax people, beneficiaries generally, are not necessarily working, but low wages and so on. You don't feel that much. If you get an extra £10 in your thing, it doesn't really matter. In your paycheck doesn't really matter that much. But it's going to get rid of, destroy any wealth creation, and I'm sure the Tories are all about wealth creation. I think that's what this is. Can't you see that? They always used to say that, given the power to vary taxes by 1-2% upwards. What we doubt? Attract investment, but anyway, that one of Saul Alinsky's methods is to personalise the target. So, Mr. Tomkins, that was not acceptable what he did. He got us in this mess, well-meaning or otherwise. Not Mr. Tomkins, well-meaning or otherwise. The road to hell is paved.
Paved with good intentions. Indeed, it is.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay, all right, moving on. Right, David, you're up.
I'm up. My Zoomer of the week is Wolverhampton-born, Belfast-raised broadcaster and now fervent Scottish nationalist Lesley Riddoch. This week, Lesley has sought to make political capital from the UK government's mini-budget. Now, as with all rabid Scottish nationalists, Lesley hates Conservatives, so much so that she's happy to praise Labour in order to hit or impact negatively Conservatives. So, this week, Lesley praised Keir Starmer's announcement that a Labour government would reverse the Conservative Chancellor's newly announced tax cuts. Lesley tweeted, in fact, a future Labour UK government will do what the Scottish government is doing right now. Tax high earners properly. There it goes. Thank you, Mark. That was a tweet. Isn't that wonderful? What she omitted to say, of course, was that the Scottish government is currently also taxing low-paid workers at higher rates than in the rest of the UK. Now, we went through this before in some detail. So, well done, Lesley Riddoch, for labelling Scots who earn above £14,733, which is the bar at which all Scottish workers, pay more income tax than their English counterparts. She labelled them high earners. Also, as mentioned earlier, she is now in support of an income tax rate for Scottish workers on that bracket I talked about, 43.6k to 50k, which is more than double the income tax rate paid by workers in the same salary in England. So this is what Lesley Riddoch thinks is a good idea, and it's progressive. So, okay, that's why, not for the first and certainly not for the last time, my Zoomer of the week this week is Lesley Riddoch, also known as Lesley Utterly Ridiculous.
Well, I mean, it's just these nationalist commentators, they're just, it's kind of low grade, really. There's nothing to come up with. You're like, what? She's always going on about huts. Is she the one that goes on about the huts all the time? Everyone should have a hut. And you're like, what's all this about? Because she's been to Norway or somewhere and saw people with huts, so everyone in Scotland goes to a hut. I don't know, it's like, maybe there's some merit, I don't know, but it's like, they're always trying to make they always look at something over somewhere else and like, well, really grateful for that. Yeah, well, okay, you can buy yourself a hut. Fine. If other people like it, you can get it, maybe. But I bet you'd be government mandated huts if it was up to her. Really. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Probably council tax would go up if they had huts.
Right,
I mean, we're just in a situation where they're trying, just this constant point scoring, actually, it becomes very tedious. You know, you're like, you say one thing on Twitter or on social media, and then they come up with all this tedious whataboutery, and you're like, no, you know, it's just, you know, just look at the basic thing here. Poor or not wealthy Scots are being taxed more. Do something about it, you know, or take the consequences.
Well, here's an interesting comment. So Catherine says, SNP think that their supporters are so thick they don't understand the tax changes at the lower end. Which might be true.
Well, they did that whole 19% thing, you know, basically make people 20 pence extra a week or something ridiculous, just so that they could get a headline out of it and say, we've got lower tax rates in the whole of the UK. I mean,
You can't even buy a Freddo for 20 pence these days.
It's true, actually. Yeah. 5 for £1.25.
Putting it in context.
well, it really is terrible. I mean, if you're just one of these nationalist commentators calls a load of nonsense, you know, and at some point you always wonder, if you look at Labour policies are so good, well, should you go and join Labour? They're most likely going to win the next election. We talked about this a little bit, how they're going to be able to do that. Okay, see, time is running on. So, Mary's view will be up.
Yay. Okay, so my Zoomer of the week is someone called Gingerbeard, who is known as @Galan2230 on Twitter. So Gingerbeard has been very busy this week, arguing and fighting with people on Twitter who question the Nationalist doctrine. So at first I thought he might be some kind of pirate because of his name, you know, Gingerbeard. And I'm saying he, but you never know these days. But it turns out that Gingerbeard isn't really one for sailing or ships or even ferries. Mark, can you put the tweet up, please?
The majority of Scots have never been on a ferry. The majority of Scots couldn't down with ferries, and so on and so forth.
You've got 10 points there, I have to say.
Yes. What do you think about the ferries?
So, I mean, obviously I've gone on earlier about the ferry scandal, but this is Gingerbeard's take on it, which I think tells us two things about nationalists, really. Number one, they don't care about the scandals and corruption in the SNP or the Scottish Government. They don't see the bigger picture of where it leads and what it causes. So people and businesses are suffering on the islands, and all that wasted of money could have been put to better use somewhere else, like, as I said earlier, the national health or the cost of living crisis or for councils or whatever. But he just thinks that this is not an issue. And I think it also shows that he's a little bit insular, a little bit local there. They don't like to travel and have no wider view of the world, which is really why they can't see the big picture. Gingerbeard also, so just while I was looking at that, I saw another tweet he had as well. So it posed an interesting question this week, but I guess we'll leave that for another
Does
time.
anyone remember driving Scotland in 300 years prior to when the SNP took over? Didn't think so. Not too sure about that one. Conscious of the time, so apparently it's my turn to decide Zoomer this week, and it's a challenge. Gingerbeard. I'm going to actually give it to you, Mary, because these
Again, that'll be 3 weeks in a row.
Oh, is it? Well, maybe we should give it to you.
No, you give it to me.
Well, I think it's representative of the kind of level of delusion that we see every day on these nationalists. The nationalists who believe that they're actually going to get a referendum in 2023, that they believe that the referendum they would get would be binding, when it's clear the Lord Advocate and so on said it's going to only be advisory and will be boycotted. And they believe that there could be a progressive alliance with Labour or the intelligentsia. Like, oh no, they're not. They don't want to work with us. In fact, they hate us and all that type of stuff. So this delusion, what we're trying to do in this show is to stop this delusion. And people like Gingerbeard and others, the many multitude of them, whether they're real or whether they're bots or whatever it is, their delusion will end at some point. You do have to grow up and accept the reality that you lost the referendum in 2014 and there's not another one coming. That's it. So, on that note, we will close. We will be back another show next Wednesday, September 28th, at usual time of 7 p.m.
So thank you to all our donors. Thank you to everyone who watched tonight, and thank you to UK Union Voice and United Against Separation and the other pages who support us. Thank you all.
Right, and if you can do two things, well, actually one thing, just please subscribe to the show. We need all those subscriptions we can get. That would be great.
And thank you everyone for your comments tonight. I've really enjoyed
Yes,
reading them.
fantastic comments.
Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. So I'll leave you with the thought of the week. It's not anything special. It's basically, we'll talk about this, we'll talk about more of this as it comes through, but nationalism just simply is fake socialism. You cannot be progressive, you cannot be a socialist if you want to join an imaginary border and take all the good stuff for yourself. That's not the way it works. Pooling and sharing across the UK is, for what it's worth, socialism. Drawing a line and dividing people are based on your greedy wants. It's not. So, anyway, that's good night from me. Thank you for joining us on the show tonight. Thank you to all the people who commented.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone, and see you all next week.